The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. After he had fed the people, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and proceed him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. After doing so, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles ashore, was being tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. At once Jesus spoke to them. "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught Peter and said to him, "O ye of little faith, why do you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat did him homage, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord. On this 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time, we continue the theme of understanding Jesus' true identity and his intentions for the world to come and save us. Nothing in this story indicates that the disciples thought that God had sent the storm to endanger them. Everything indicates that God sent Jesus so that he could be identified as his son who comes to save. If we go back to our first reading and understand the message and the theme and the golden thread given to us today, we have to understand that the readings, the psalm, and the gospel all tell us to be attentive. Yes, we have the common theme that we hear cycle after cycle, that Jesus is Lord and Savior. But there's an underlying gift for us today that if we just are attentive to God, we get gifts multiplied. If we start with Elijah, we have to understand that Elijah waited in his attentiveness. He heard a mighty wind, he saw an earthquake, he witnessed a fire coming near, but yet he waited. None of these revealed God to him. None of the troubles, none of the crises. No, God finally came to him in a whisper, reminding him that a genuine relationship with God is never the result of compulsion or the world and what the world dictates or what Mother Nature has to say. The Lord's salvation came through a whisper of kindness and peace. Today's gospel is very similar to that understanding of attentiveness. It adds a beautiful layer to it, though. You have to be intentional in your attentiveness. Now, I know y'all enjoyed Sister Joanne's Bible study on Tuesday. It was about being attentive in God. It was a good time, and that theme continues. If you understood her Bible study, if you had the opportunity to be blessed by that. You see, in the story of the gospel today, after Jesus had broken the bread with the crowd, he sent the disciples and everyone else away and went off to pray. He intentionally prayed. He intentionally sent them away. But while the disciples were in this boat doing exactly what Jesus had told them, they found themselves in a crisis. I've had to shake my head during this pandemic and wonder how many of us was like the disciples that day. We were doing exactly what God had intended for us before COVID-19. We were doing exactly what God intended for us before the racial unrest in this country. Well, I'm sure if you understand that a few hours earlier, Peter and his companions had given away all their food, and when everybody had eaten, there was still plenty of food left. They had done just what God told them to do, and they witnessed great things going on. Now, when they thought they were going to die in the middle of this crisis, Jesus comes again and says, "It is I. Do not be afraid." At least until the terror dragged their faith down and the sea level became a reality for them. Peter, I'm sure, didn't know what to do when that reality hit. There was probably nothing left to do but scream or be troubled when Peter realized that his doubt, or whatever the case may be, the reality of the water rising. Can you imagine when Peter would tell that story later? I can't imagine what the stories are going to be at the card tables at the barbecue a year from now when we start telling our pandemic stories. Or where were you when they tore the Columbus statue down from Grand Park? Where were you? Nothing in the story indicates that the disciples understood that God did not send the storm to endanger them, but to help them in their attentiveness and in their intentional behaviors. The book of Kings says God wanted the king and the queen to hear him. He didn't send the troubles to kill them or Elijah. Much like the major troubles in today's world, the first thing that we have to understand that yes, there will be natural phenomena. Yes, there will be human faults and doubts. The teaching is not that God tests our faith. The teaching is that he comes to help us to discover what we believe about him and ourselves during the test. Elijah discovered that God's whispering was more powerful than the wind, earthquake, or chariots. What have you discovered is more powerful about you and your life and your gifts during this time of crisis? In the midst of a noisy, violent world, we have to strive to hear God's whisper. We have to strive to put aside our doubt. But hearing God's voice demands that kind of attention so that we are intentional in our gift to receive a Lord who comes to save us, set aside our fears, and grab our hands when we sink in. Don't be doubtful, church. Be joyful, because God is with us. We just need to understand and recognize him when the waters get rough, or the earth shakes, or the storm comes, or the chariots load up. We just need to grab a hold of the hand that he has waiting on us. The rest of the story you know. Peter put aside his doubt and became the rock that the church was built on. Elijah became one of the greatest prophets of the Old Testament. What will you become in this time that you can hear God's whisper? What will you become? Who will you be for God's people? Be attentive, but be intentional.